And it's completely right that they just want to roll through the campaign without creating any great controversies, which means that their campaign it's been more boring than Rishi Sunak announcing a whole range of policies that don't make much sense, and Ed Davey falling off things, both of which are way more newsworthy. But if you ask who the happiest party is, the answer is the one that's 20 points ahead in the polls every time.
You're listening to Times Radio, and every week at this time during the election campaign, we're going to gather our panel of campaign insiders, those who've worked on the inside of government and inside the parties, know how to plan political strategies, and know their way around a policy or two.
How much damage will the D-Day events really have caused? Did manifestos move the dial, and how much do people really want their political leaders to be real people? Our experts are going to help us work that out. And today they are APCO Senior Director Joe Tanner, who's advised the Tories and Labour politicians. Sean Kemp, previously Head of Media for the Lib Dems and was in Number 10 during the coalition years, now at Hanbury Strategy. And Tom Hamilton, now Director at Public First, who worked for Labour under Gordon Brown and Ed Miliband. Hello all.
Hello.
Good morning.
Now, I should say, if you're listening and you want to get involved or ask a question, you can send it over to us on 0333 003 2353. Let's start with a stock take, shall we? It's the second full week of campaigning. Joe, in your eyes, how have the parties done?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think the Lib Dems have executed a strategy that I'm not sure many of us understood at the beginning, with the sort of photo ops of Ed Davey doing his sort of crazy stunts during half term, but then have started to sort of put these quite thoughtful videos out explaining more about the man. And I think that's actually been quite successful. I've noticed a lot of people that I know commenting on those videos, talking about how it sort of touched them. I think Labour, it didn't look like it was going particularly well I didn't actually think Keir Starmer had a bad debate, but I thought the sort of inability to deal with this 2,000 tax figure, it took a long time. I was kind of sitting at home sort of willing him to get stuck in a bit more. And obviously afterwards, it felt like the sort of Tory strategy on that, with these Treasury figures, or non-Treasury figures, as they were not allowed to claim they were, started to sort of fall apart for the Tories. And then by the end of the week, we've just ended up this complete catastrophe where Rishi Sunak's actions have sort of left. I've sort of seen umpteen spokesmen now, trying to just peddle the line that, there's been an apology, but there is no explanation for why the Prime Minister was not going to be at the international commemorations for D-Day. And I think that is going to run and run. I'm not sure it's going to stop.
So, Sean, if we take that as the Tories have had not a great week at the end of the second big week of campaigning, Labour kind of middling, maybe some ground to make up, but not awful, and the Lib Dems are doing okay. Where does that leave the parties going into what is going to be a huge week on manifestos?
Well, I think Lib Dems will carry on just hoping to get noticed, which is basically the theme of the campaign. They've done all right there so far. I mean, you can see the themes, really. Lib Dems want to get noticed. Labour just want to not do anything catastrophically stupid to knock down their poll rating. And the Conservatives desperately want to try and find... We can talk about game changers. Really what they're trying to do is appeal to core vote and try and limit the extent of the damage, but keep on managing to sort of run around with their trousers on fire. I suspect the Conservatives will hope that they can just get through Manifesto week with some positive announcements that get a bit of good coverage to their core vote. Labour will hope not to offend anyone, quite frankly. As long as, if the Labour game is just not to annoy people and just carry on as they are, and they're going to be fine. So I think Labour's manifesto will probably be quite boring. It should be quite boring. And if they get to the end of the week and we're all talking about how boring it was, they'll go, great, another week, and we're a little bit closer to the finishing line.
Tom, what's your take on the end of the week?
Well, I mean, the Tories have been running a fairly sort of hyperactive strategy where they've been desperate to get noticed for the last fortnight. And the thing that they've been noticed for most, and the thing that's got the most cut through, has been the thing that they didn't turn up for, which was D-Day. I think Labour will be reasonably happy with the way it's gone. They had a slightly wobbly debate, as Joe said, on Tuesday night, but I think they managed to turn that quite effectively from a row about the £2,000 tax rise and whether it was true or not, to a row about whether you can trust the Tories on anything at all, which is much more comfortable ground for them. And it's completely right that they just want to roll through the campaign without creating any great controversies, which means that their campaign it's been more boring than Rishi Sunak announcing a whole range of policies that don't make much sense, and Ed Davey falling off things, both of which are way more newsworthy. But if you ask who the happiest party is, the answer is the one that's 20 points ahead in the polls every time.
Okay, let's just ask you to put aside your party favours for a moment and look at the D-Day issue, the Prime Minister's absence for the international part of the commemoration. As an analyst, is it the turning point of the campaign? I mean, just how bad is it? Sean, let's start with you.
I don't know if it's a turning point because the Conservatives are already so far behind. I think it reinforces a slightly, frankly, hapless impression of Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Party. So I think it can do some damage. Is it a turning point? I'm not so sure about that because it was already going in a bad direction, it seems to me. But the thing about campaigns is you think of them in terms of trying to win each day. So did we win today or did the other lot win today? And something like the D-Day commemoration, that's an easy win for the governing party because you turn up and look like a prime minister and meet people. So they've taken what was one of the days you would have marked down as definite Conservative Party win, and they turned it into Conservative Party loss. And that's a strange thing about that. They've knocked a potentially good day off and turned it into a disastrous one. Look, it might make a bit of difference, but I don't think it's like a turning point because the turning point probably for the Conservative Party happened, 2 years ago.
Well, we'll get the views of Tom and Joe in just a moment. You're listening to Times Radio.
London Zoo recently welcomed 3 lion cubs born as part of the conservation breeding programme for endangered Asiatic lions. And Lion Trust are inviting Times Radio listeners to choose their names. Vote at the Times Radio competitions page and you could win a gold family membership, giving unlimited visits to London and Whipsnade zoos and much more. Lion Trust, a specialist asset management company, supports ZSL and London Zoo to protect endangered species and to educate millions about vital wildlife conservation. Listen to The Story with Manveen Rana, Luke Jones and William Hague. One remarkable story told in depth each day. Find it in the Times Radio app or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Bought a double soaker water blaster for the kids. Move your deck chair across the garden 5 times just to stay in the sun. Dinner al fresco, no matter what the weather. You take summer seriously. And at Asda, so do we. With 2 easy and delicious midweek meals for just £8. Like barbecue pulled pork, smoky fajita chicken stir-fry and salmon sizzlers. Dinner done, so you can summer on. Asda. That's more like it. Selected stores online subject to availability. £4.40 to £5 each, serves 2. May exclude express and small stores. See asda.com/small stores.
McDonald's fries. You taste of paradise, and my love I can't disguise. Oh, McDonald's fries.
Thanks for the poem, Lisa. The fries you love now love you back. Introducing McDonald's Surprise Fries. Millions of tasty prizes to be won, including cash. Peel on any medium or large fries for a chance to win. End 2nd of July. App may be required. 18 plus. UK only. Serve from 11 a.m. Terms apply.
This is Times Radio.
Tom Hamilton, just how damaging do you think the D-Day episode is for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives?
I think it's very damaging because it takes what is naturally a Conservative strength, which is around, national security, respect for the armed forces and so on, which incidentally they were already trying to play into some campaign announcements around national service and so on, and turn it into a story about whether the Prime Minister cares about our history and our troops and whether he understands the significance of events like the D-Day commemorations. I mean, we were being told on Tuesday, all the coverage was about how the campaign was basically going to shut down for 2 days because everyone's off to Normandy to commemorate D-Day, and that's right and proper, and we shouldn't expect to hear any politics for a bit. And in that light, the fact that the Tory briefing that actually we were always planning to come home early almost plays worse, because the whole point is that those are 2 days when you weren't going to be doing anything other than paying your respects to the fallen. So I think it makes it very hard now for them to get onto the front foot, and you saw that in the way that we've had Tory spokespeople, from Rishi Sunak downwards, talking about how they're apologising, how sorry they were, how it was a big mistake. If your top line in an election campaign is "this thing we did was a massive mistake," you're probably not winning it.
Joe Tanner, how could this have happened?
Oh, I've absolutely no idea. I've been sort of racking my brains. I saw Mel Stride. I've listened to sort of some of the Work and Pension Secretary sort of talking today. And what's really interesting about this is I just don't think sorry is enough. That the problem is you normally expect when people apologise, they normally sort of give some explanation as to why they did something. And the point with this is that there just isn't an explanation available from what we can see. There's no rationale because everyone sort of assumed, oh, it was because of the campaign he went back to do an interview. Then it emerged that it was already planned all along. And to your question to Sean, Adam, I think it is a turning point. I don't think it's a turning point in terms of the polls. I'm not sure it will affect things particularly there. But what I do think it does is it makes it incredibly difficult for people that are sort of were clinging on by their fingertips to support the Conservatives, either at a local level or even, quite frankly, as candidates. Because if you look at what happened on Friday, if you're Penny Mordaunt and you're being predicted to lose your seat, Mel Stride, another one out today, who's also predicted to lose his seat, they're actually being forced to sort of defend what is essentially the indefensible. And so it makes it incredibly difficult for them. But at a local level, councillors, MPs, people in the community go to events around commemorating what happened during the war year in, year out. They give up, they probably don't attend, they're probably not present for their kids' birthday parties and stuff because they go and do what is part of their civic duty. It's what you do. It's what the Prime Minister does, representing the UK on a world stage and at such an important event. And I think it makes it incredibly difficult for those people that are, the foot soldiers we always talk about, those people that are there to sort of do that really important role of talking to people on the doorstep, saying, well, I know you're saying you're a bit worried about the Conservatives, but we're going to do this and we're going to do that. When they're forced to have that conversation on the doorstep, I think it puts them in an impossible position.
Yeah, and it also had the effect of completely sort of neutering that Tory attack line on tax, which the Prime Minister had made quite a good job of landing in the TV debate earlier in the week. It was then questioned, of course, by Labour, who produced a letter suggesting that the calculations were not independent. They were based on Tory advisors' assumptions of Labour policies. A huge row ensued. All of that has since been really wiped out by this D-Day question. Sean, I'm interested on tax. Do you think that this is a difficult area for all parties? Because the reality is that there's going to be spending cuts, whoever gets into government next. Is it time to be a bit more honest, or is this just the reality of election campaigning?
Look, the cynical part of me thinks it's just the reality of election campaigning. I mean, I can sit here and pontificate and say what the truth is, which the truth is, yes, they should all be much more honest about the fiscal mess that we're in and the fact that we're going to need to raise more money. And that's not just the case in general election campaigns. It was everything we had around the budget and the autumn statements and so on.
So why don't they do it, Sean?
Because ultimately it's very good for, like, you look at an opinion poll and everyone will say, we wish that politicians were much more honest about things like tax. I can tell you now, if the Labour Party or Conservatives were much more honest about tax and said, you know what, we're going to have to tax you a lot more, and I'm really sorry about that, they wouldn't be doing very well in the polls. So there is a cynicism to it, but I'm afraid it's a cynicism that's based in hard experience, that basically, as much as people might say they want to hear more honesty in these kind of debates, a party that is honest about this stuff does bad in elections. So you end up with parties trying to kind of balance being honest enough, but also doing what is frankly politically sensible. And I know it's not an appealing answer, but it's one that's backed up by what happens every time there's an election.
Tom, is that right, do you think? Even with a 20-point lead, this is just too difficult for Keir Starmer to really be honest about?
Well, I don't think it's that he's being dishonest about it. I think it's that he's set out the tax plans he's prepared to talk about at this point. And that means that on the specific charge that's being made about the £2,000, he's able to say, well, he is able to say, but he didn't say in the debate until very late in the debate, which is part of the problem. He's able to say, look, this isn't true. This particular figure is garbage, because it really is garbage. And it was a problem actually that he didn't say that, and that's why it sort of ran for as long as it did. The bigger point that the Conservative government doesn't have credible spending plans going forward, that it made tax pledges the last election that it hasn't met, that Rishi Sunak stood in the Tory leadership election on a pledge to cut income tax, and has now replaced that with a pledge to cut national insurance as well, which is equally incredible, and that people think that Labour may very well need to raise some taxes that it hasn't ruled out. All of those are true, but for as long as fictional charges are being laid at the door of political parties, they have an incentive to rebut the fictional charges rather than to just come out and say, but by the way, we're going to raise these other taxes that the other party hasn't even mentioned. That would be a mad thing for them to come out and say as a proactive story. So they're not going to do it.
Even if that's what the polls say. Joe, there is also a sense from the Tories today, they're talking about, you know, £12 billion of extra cash they can raise through welfare, clawing back welfare payments. Some people have suggested that this is a policy designed to give them something big to put in their manifestos, which we'll come to in a minute, and that really it's a panic move because they recognise that the election is slipping away if it was ever within grasp. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think they had to bring out some sort of content, because ultimately what they've otherwise been doing is just saying, well, yeah, but those guys are going to do something worse than we've done. And I think the sense that they had to try and regain some sort of narrative, and you know, this is an administration that's been accused before about, you know, having sort of voids in the news cycle and just not really producing anything to be spoken about. At the same time, they've then also tried to have themed weeks that have been a complete disaster. So their sort of sense of news management has not necessarily played out particularly well in the past, but they're definitely trying to have something to say. I think the problem is the public are still pretty distracted by what's already happened in the past couple of weeks.
Now we're going to get the manifestos, Liberal Democrats tomorrow, the Conservative Party on Tuesday, apparently at a venue linked to Formula One, and then we're going to get Labour on Thursday. So do they matter at all, Sean?
Yeah, they can do. I mean, it certainly mattered for Theresa May, for example, not in a good way, but you know, the policy in the manifesto certainly had a substantive impact on how the election went. I think a lot of times, actually, your biggest headline grabbing policy is often you've briefed in advance, so it's not necessarily that day that's as huge, but you can still have maybe one rabbit out the hat, to use the key cliche, that you can still try and get some coverage for and can hope to get coverage of. And it's a day you know you're going to get covered and people are going to write about you. It matters in that sense. It matters really quickly in one other sense as well, which is the stuff you mentioned in your manifesto, if you get into government, is actually easier to get through Parliament, because there's a parliamentary convention that means the House of Lords can't block it if it's in your manifesto. So it actually matters from a governing point of view as well as just being in the point of view of the campaign.
But Labour already said they're going to be boring, Tom.
Yeah, they're going to be boring. I don't expect their manifesto to have very many, if any, surprises in it. You know, if you gave me an afternoon, I could probably go away and write most of it myself based on basically memory and stuff that they've already published.
Feel free to, and then come back tomorrow on the podcast and we'll put it out if you like.
It depends how much you're going to pay me to do it. The point that Sean makes is really important, because it doesn't just matter as an electioneering tool, although that's the prism through which we're all viewing it now, because there's going to be a vote in less than a month. It's whichever party wins the election, its manifesto is going to shape what it does for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's partly about, as Sean says, how easy it is to get the Lords to vote for things, but it's also, it just is what it does. What are its cabinet ministers seeking to achieve and not achieve? What are the priorities on which it will be judged? When the party that wins the election goes to the public in 5 years' time, is it able to say, we promised these things and we delivered them and therefore you should trust us again?
Yeah.
Or is it going to have to find a way of saying, well, we failed in all this stuff?